I would rather walk to my destination than share the same breathing air with a filthy stray dog, straight out of the slums. The shrill, piercing voice echoed violently through the cramped, otherwise silent space of the first-class cabin. Evelyn, drenched in a suffocating cloud of overpriced designer perfume, jabbed her sharply manicured finger right at the face of the quiet black man sitting next to her. "You smell like poverty. Get your trash out of my sight and go back to economy where you belong, before I have you thrown off this plane in handcuffs. Hold on. Let's freeze this exact moment, right here." You are probably looking at this scene and wondering how a supposedly elite passenger in a $10,000 luxury seat ends up screaming like an absolute maniac at a man who hasn't spoken a single word. To understand the absolute magnitude of the catastrophic mistake this woman is about to make, we need to rewind the clock by exactly 2 hours. Let's go back to the bustling terminal of the international airport. Marcus was exhausted. It was the kind of bone-deep, soul-crushing fatigue that settles into your joints after you have been awake and working in a high-stress environment for 36 hours straight. He was a highly respected veteran in the aviation industry, but today, he wasn't wearing his crisp white uniform shirt. He wasn't wearing the heavy blazer with the 4 golden stripes shining brightly on his shoulders. He was off duty. He had just completed a grueling, multi-leg international cargo flight. He had spent the last 2 days flying through terrible weather systems to deliver critical medical supplies across 2 different continents. All he wanted right now, in this world, was to go home. He missed his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, more than anything. In his worn-out brown leather jacket, plain gray t-shirt, and faded denim jeans, Marcus looked like any other incredibly tired traveler. He didn't care about looking wealthy. He didn't need to flaunt his status to strangers. He was flying deadhead today. For those who don't know, that means the airline had placed him in an available premium seat simply to reposition him back to his home base. He walked down the jet bridge, feeling the familiar hum of the aircraft engines vibrating through the floorboards. He stepped into the luxurious first-class cabin. He found his assigned seat, 2 Bravo. He sat down with a heavy sigh of relief. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, slightly crumpled piece of paper. It was a crayon-drawn picture of an airplane that his little girl Lily had made for him. A soft, genuine smile broke across his tired face. He carefully tucked the drawing safely into the hardcover book he was reading, using it as a bookmark. He leaned his head back against the plush leather headrest and closed his eyes. He finally had some peace and quiet, or so he thought. Enter Evelyn. She strutted down the aisle like the red carpet had been rolled out specifically for her custom-made high heels. Evelyn was the wife of a mid-level corporate executive, but she acted like she personally owned the airspace they were about to fly through. She was the textbook definition of toxic entitlement. She thrived on looking down on others. It gave her a sick, twisted sense of power to make service workers feel small. The moment she stepped onto the plane, the atmosphere in the cabin grew incredibly heavy. This welcome champagne is practically boiling. She snapped viciously at the lead flight attendant, thrusting the crystal flute back onto the serving tray so hard that it almost spilled. Do you people even know what proper chilling temperature is? Or did they pick you up from a cheap roadside diner? The flight attendant, a seasoned professional named Sarah, offered a tight but polite apology. Evelyn just rolled her eyes dramatically and marched toward row 2. She expected absolute luxury. She expected absolute exclusivity. She certainly did not expect Marcus. Evelyn stopped dead in her tracks at the sight of seat 2 Alpha. Her eyes darted like daggers to the man sitting in 2 Bravo. Marcus was resting quietly, his worn leather jacket blending into the pristine, luxurious environment of the premium seat. Evelyn's lip curled up into a sneer of pure, unfiltered disgust. She stood frozen in the narrow aisle. She was intentionally blocking the boarding process for everyone else behind her just to make a scene. She huffed loudly. She sighed aggressively. She tapped her designer shoe against the carpeted floor. Marcus politely shifted his knees sideways to give her maximum room to slide into her window seat. He kept his eyes glued to the pages of his book. He knew exactly what type of person she was. Over his 20 years of flying around the globe, he had seen every possible flavor of human entitlement. He had learned long ago that absolute silence was always the best response to ignorance. But Evelyn wasn't going to let this perceived insult go. She dropped her massive, heavily studded designer tote bag directly onto Marcus's armrest. She let the heavy metal buckle scrape violently against the fabric of his sleeve. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was dripping with venom and fake politeness. "I think you are deeply lost." Marcus slowly lifted his head and looked at her. "I beg your pardon?" I said. "You are lost." Evelyn pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the back of the long aircraft. "The economy class section is all the way back there, past the curtain. You need to grab your little bag and move right now before the real paying passengers need to sit down." Marcus remained completely calm. His heart rate didn't even spike. "This is my assigned seat, ma'am. I am in seat 2 Bravo." He offered a polite, strictly professional nod and looked back down at the text in his book. That calm, unbothered dismissal. That was the absolute worst thing he could have possibly done to a fragile, inflated ego like Evelyn's. She felt her blood begin to boil underneath her expensive skincare. How dare this absolute nobody ignore her command? How dare he speak to her as if they were standing on equal ground? She finally squeezed angrily into her window seat, but she made sure to dramatically pull out an antibacterial wet wipe. She began aggressively scrubbing the shared center armrest, staring right at him while she did it. She muttered under her breath, making sure her voice was just loud enough for him to hear every single word. "Absolutely disgusting. I cannot believe they just let anyone buy these premium tickets nowadays. He probably booked it with stolen credit card points. Or maybe he's a charity case." Marcus slowly and deliberately turned the page of his book. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue back. He didn't try to defend his honor. His silence was an impenetrable fortress. But the boarding doors of the aircraft hadn't even closed yet, and Evelyn was just getting started. The moment the boarding doors were prepared to close, Evelyn hit her call button. She didn't just press it once. She jammed her manicured finger into the button over and over again like it was an emergency alarm. Ding, 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 ding. The sound echoed through the cabin, cutting through the low murmur of boarding passengers. Sarah, a veteran flight attendant with 15 years of experience, hurried down the aisle. She plastered on her best customer service smile, though her eyes showed instant exhaustion. "Yes, ma'am. How can I assist you today?" Evelyn didn't even look up at her initially. She made a grand, sweeping gesture with her hand, pointing directly at Marcus. "You can assist me by doing your actual job and removing this safety hazard from my breathing space. I need him taken out of the first-class cabin immediately." Sarah blinked, taken aback by the sheer hostility in the woman's voice. "I am sorry, ma'am. Is there a problem with his boarding pass?" "The problem is that he clearly does not belong in this section of society," Evelyn practically shouted, making sure her voice carried across all 4 rows of the premium cabin. "Look at the way he is dressed. He looks like a homeless drifter who wandered in from the street. He is making me physically nauseous. Plus, I saw him eyeing my limited edition Birkin bag the second I sat down. I refused to fly for 6 hours, sitting next to a common criminal." Marcus let out a slow, incredibly measured breath. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't let the anger show on his face. "Ma'am, I haven't even looked in the general direction of your luggage. I am just trying to read my book and get home to my family." Evelyn let out a harsh, grating laugh. It was the kind of laugh meant to humiliate and demean. "Oh, wow. It actually speaks English. Listen to me, you pathetic piece of trash. I am a Diamond Elite Medallion member. My husband is the chief financial officer of a Fortune 500 company. We spend millions of dollars with this pathetic airline every single year. I demand that you relocate this vagrant back to economy where he belongs, or better yet, kick him off the plane completely before I lose my temper." Sarah, now deeply uncomfortable, tried her best to de-escalate the rising tension. "Ma'am, I understand you are upset, but the flight is completely booked full today. This gentleman has a valid, paid ticket for seat 2 Bravo. I cannot legally ask a paying passenger to give up their seat without a valid security threat." Evelyn's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. Her eyes went wide with sheer indignation. How dare a common service worker tell her no? She reached into her oversized purse. pulled out her designer wallet, and ripped out a crisp $100 bill. She literally threw it directly at Sarah's chest. The bill fluttered pathetically to the carpeted floor. "There is your cheap little tip, sweetheart. Now, pick it up, go find the pilot, and tell him I want this garbage taken out right now. Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? I can have your entire career ended with one phone call before we even reach the runway." The entire first-class cabin fell dead silent. You could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. And this is exactly where the story gets incredibly sickening, because in that cabin, sitting in those plush, $10,000 seats, were some of the most powerful people in the city. There were corporate lawyers, there were tech executives, people with real power and a voice that mattered. But what did they do in the face of this blatant, racist bullying? Absolutely nothing. The wealthy businessman in One Alpha suddenly found his daily newspaper incredibly fascinating. The young influencer across the aisle hurriedly put on her noise-canceling headphones, turning her face toward the window. Nobody wanted to get involved. Nobody wanted to risk the wrath of an entitled, screaming rich woman. They chose the easy way out. They chose comfortable silence over doing the right thing. Marcus sat there, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of their collective cowardice. He had seen this happen 1,000 times in his life, but it never stopped stinging. The harsh reality that in the eyes of the elite, your dignity is entirely conditional. Sarah stood paralyzed in the aisle, her face flushed red with humiliation. She slowly bent down to pick up the $100 bill, her hands shaking slightly. "I will go inform the flight deck of your complaint, ma'am." She quickly retreated to the front galley, eager to escape the toxic energy. Evelyn settled back into her plush seat, with a smug, victorious grin plastered across her face. She turned her head slightly toward Marcus, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You see that? That is how the real world operates. Money and status talk, and nobodies like you just get stepped on. You should have run to the back of the bus when I gave you the chance." Marcus didn't reply. He slowly opened his book again. He found the page where he had tucked the crayon, drawing his little girl, Lily had made. The slightly crooked airplane, the big, uneven letters spelling out, "I love you, Daddy, fly safe." Looking at it grounded him. It reminded him of his real purpose. He chose to completely ignore Evelyn, gently tracing his thumb over Lily's colorful drawing. But to a narcissist like Evelyn, being ignored was the ultimate insult. It meant her power wasn't working. She noticed exactly what he was looking at. A pathetic, cheap piece of scrap paper. Something dark and cruel snapped inside her mind. If she couldn't break his spirit with her words, she was going to do it with her actions. She grabbed her half-full glass of iced sparkling water from the center console. She didn't hesitate for a single second. With a vicious, calculated flick of her wrist, she tossed the entire glass of freezing water directly over the armrest. The ice and water splashed violently across Marcus's lap, but the water didn't just hit his jeans. It soaked right through the open pages of his hardcover book. It completely drenched the paper drawing. The cheap, vibrant crayon colors immediately began to bleed and run together into a muddy mess. Lily's precious artwork was ruined in a matter of seconds. Marcus completely froze, his dark eyes locked onto the ruined, soaking wet drawing. For the first time since he stepped onto that jet bridge, the mask of perfect, professional calm slipped away. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck jumped. His massive hands gripped the leather armrests, his knuckles turning pure white under the strain. Evelyn slammed the empty crystal glass down onto the tray table with a sharp crack. She leaned in close, an evil smile playing on her lips. "Oops. Looks like we hit some sudden turbulence. Now you really do look like a wet, dirty stray dog." Before Marcus could even process the absolute audacity of her action, Evelyn reached up and smashed the call button again. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "Help. Flight attendant. Help me. This crazy man just threw his drink everywhere and tried to grab me. He is acting violently erratic. Get airport security on this plane, right this second. I want him dragged off in handcuffs or I am calling the federal authorities myself." She sat back abruptly, crossing her arms tight against her chest. She was absolutely confident that she had just won the ultimate victory. She had played the victim card flawlessly. She had the diamond elite status. She had the wealthy husband. And in her delusional mind, the airport police were just her personal bodyguards waiting to do her bidding. But she had no idea. She had absolutely no idea that underneath that cheap, wet leather jacket sat the one man on this entire aircraft who held the power of God. She had just signed her own death warrant. 2 armed airport police officers stepped onto the aircraft. They looked incredibly serious. Evelyn immediately turned on the fake tears. "Oh, thank God you are finally here. This man is completely unhinged. He just threw his drink everywhere and threatened my life. Get him out of here before he hurts someone." She pointed her shaking, manicured finger right at Marcus. The officers turned their attention to seat 2 Bravo. But they didn't reach for their handcuffs. They didn't yell any aggressive commands. Instead, their entire posture completely changed. They stood up perfectly straight. "Is there a problem here, sir?" one of the officers asked. The tone was incredibly respectful, almost deferential. Evelyn stopped her fake crying instantly. She looked completely confused. "Why are you calling him, sir?" "I told you to grab him." Marcus didn't even look at her. He carefully picked up the ruined, soggy drawing his daughter had made. He placed it gently onto the center tray table. Then, he stood up. He was a very tall, broad-shouldered man. He reached for the zipper of his cheap, soaking wet leather jacket. He pulled it down slowly. He slipped the heavy jacket off his shoulders and let it drop onto his seat. The entire first-class cabin collectively gasped. Underneath that worn-out, ugly brown jacket was a crisp, perfectly tailored white uniform shirt. On his shoulders sat 2 heavy black epaulets. Each one featured 4 bright, shining gold stripes. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a senior captain. Pinned right above his left breast pocket was a solid gold aviation badge, and right next to it, a Federal Aviation Administration safety inspector pin. Evelyn's jaw literally dropped open. The color drained completely out of her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "That is impossible." Marcus finally turned to look directly into her eyes. The calm, quiet, submissive demeanor was completely gone. He looked at her with the cold, absolute authority of a man who commands a 300-ton flying machine. "Ma'am. Under Federal Aviation Regulation 91.3, the pilot in command is directly responsible for, and is the final authority as to, the operation of that aircraft." His deep voice boomed through the dead silent cabin. "And as the senior captain and lead safety inspector for this entire airline, I am officially determining that you are a direct threat to the safety and security of this flight." He turned to the lead flight attendant, Sarah, who was now standing nearby with a massive, satisfied smile on her face. "Sarah, bring me the denied boarding paperwork." Evelyn panicked. Total, absolute panic finally set in. "Wait. Please, wait a minute. I was just joking. It was just a terrible misunderstanding. My husband is a chief financial officer. If you kick me off, it will be a public relations nightmare for his entire company." Marcus didn't even blink. He took the black pen from Sarah. "Your husband's career is none of my concern. You aggressively assaulted a passenger. You caused a severe, documented disturbance on a federal transport. And you ruined a priceless gift from my 7-year-old daughter." He signed the bottom of the legal form with a sharp, decisive stroke. "You are not just getting kicked off this flight. I am permanently revoking your Diamond Elite Medallion status. And you are officially being placed on the federal no-fly list. You will never step foot on a commercial airplane again. Officers, please escort this unmanageable passenger off my aircraft." The 2 police officers immediately moved in. They grabbed Evelyn roughly by both of her arms. "Let go of me," she screamed. "Do you know who I am? I will sue every single one of you." But her empty threats meant absolutely nothing now. The officers snapped a pair of cold steel handcuffs around her wrists. The loud click of the metal echoed beautifully through the cabin. It was the most satisfying sound in the world. They dragged her kicking and screaming down the aisle. Her expensive designer shoes dragged pathetically against the carpet, and that is exactly when it happened. The wealthy businessman in row 1 started it. He put his newspaper down and started clapping. Then the young influencer across the aisle joined in. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin erupted into loud, thunderous applause. They were cheering wildly as the screaming, crying, humiliated woman was dragged off the plane in handcuffs. Marcus just sat back down in his seat. He carefully wiped the water off his daughter's ruined drawing. He ignored the clapping crowd entirely. The applause echoed through the cabin, full of sweet, satisfying justice. But let's pause for a second. Let's really look at those wealthy people clapping. They just watched an entitled woman verbally abuse and throw freezing water on a tired, quiet, black man. And they did absolutely nothing to help him. They only started cheering after they realized he was wearing a powerful pilot's uniform. They didn't stand up for justice. They only stood up for power. So I have a serious question for you, and I want you to be brutally honest with yourself. If you were sitting in that cabin, and you saw that glass of water get thrown on a helpless, ordinary man in a cheap jacket, would you have unbuckled your seatbelt and stood up to defend him? Or would you have put your headphones on and looked out the window like everybody else did? Do not lie to yourself. Tell me your absolute honest truth down in the comments right now. Would you be the hero, or would you be the silent coward? Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because in the next video, we are looking at a brutal eviction notice that backfired in the most catastrophic way possible.